let's see. All right, there we go. Okay, so I'm Joanne Poyourow, and I run the Environmental Changemakers. We're located in the Westchester neighborhood of Los Angeles, which is just like 6 blocks north of LAX Airport. And I was asked to speak about lifestyles and communities. We are a community group, 100% volunteers. There's no salaries involved in what we do. First thing I thought I would do is start out with a little game here. Okay, so this was a picture that was being used on the website for this conference. And I just wanted to take a look at our vision of the future here. Let me deal with this cord here. So, what do you think? Is this what the future is going to look like?
Probably not.
Okay, so let's take a look at what's in this picture here. Okay, first of all, we got that spire way the heck up there. So I could like to carry their couch all the way up there on the stairs. Okay, without oil, that's what we're talking about. Without carbon footprint, we're talking about carrying your couch all the way up there. Over here we got this wonderful sheet glass building. What about the heating, the ventilation, the air conditioning, pumping the water all the way up there? No operable windows. It's just not going to happen. So the studies say that we're probably going to use the first 5 floors of these kind of buildings when we're dealing without petroleum, without an energy density. Okay, so right here we got the dream of LA freeways, right? We got no traffic whatsoever. But I also don't see a lot of public transportation in there. So they must be using human-powered transportation. Awesome, right? Bicycles, walking. But what about this distance between these buildings? Oh my gosh, if you have to go from here to there, that's staggering. It's absolutely staggering. So this is like somebody's dream of downtown LA if you mowed out a couple skyscrapers and put green stuff in between. Okay, so here we have, okay, we are going to need community gathering places, but this one is probably about the scale of the forum. So again, we've got heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and there's a gorgeous parking lot in front of it. Okay, so back here we've got, lawns. Now, anybody who's from Southern California knows what role lawns play in an ecological future now. So more likely, we're going to be growing lots of food everywhere we possibly can. So that this space will be converted to food. Okay, but down here, we've got this space is in the shadow of this giganto skyscraper. So, you know, as someone who grows food all the time, every single week since 2008, we've harvested. You're not going to grow too much in the shade of those buildings. So that's a staggering problem right there. We're probably going to be doing things like rainwater harvesting and capturing. Okay? So we've sort of torn apart this picture. So let's try another one. Here's another picture I just pulled off the internet. And it's got a lot of interesting things in it. Okay, so first of all, back here, we've got a house. We've got an existing structure. So if we're working with our existing structures, we're not dealing with the high energy footprint of building all those skyscrapers. Every single plant in this picture, it's a pretty clear picture. I can recognize a lot of the plants. You got tons and tons of food here. You got food, you got medicinal herbs, you got plants that are attracting beneficial insects, providing a home for the pollinators, really active garden. You got living soil. They've actively gone in and torn out the hardscape. They're starting to work with the soil. They're starting to use that soil that's nourishing, they're working with the microorganisms, nourishing the soil so that it is feeding the plants, and it's also sequestering carbon. A big issue at the Paris climate talks last December is living soil and capturing our carbon in it. Okay, so back there we got some gray object. I wasn't sure what it is, but let's say it's a water tank, okay? So you're rainwater harvesting off of all of your roofs, and it's going into tanks so you can do something with it. Back there, what do we have? Oh, cool, a junk pile. There were no junk piles in the other picture. That's because they were all using that system of the mythical concept of away. We'll take our scraps and throw it somewhere way far away where they don't have the political will to say, not in my backyard. And we'll just keep on going in our shiny, glossy city and pretend that it's going. These people know that there's value in that stuff. The fact that they have a junk pile says they know that those are the materials for a future project. So they've warehoused them and they've set them aside as reusable materials. Okay, so up there you've got a tree that's doing dual functions. It is a shade tree, it's also bearing food, it's a fruit tree. Back there you've got some sort of a green shade structure, and the green shade structure is saying to me, these people are interacting with their landscape. The people who live on this property are active with the surroundings that they've got around them. Over there you got some sort of wooden structure, don't know what it is. Let's say it's a chicken coop. Okay, so the chickens, they poop, the poop goes out to feed the garden scraps go in to feed the chickens produce eggs. Oh my gosh, you got this whole living ecosystem going on. This is what we teach in environmental change makers. We teach about building ecosystems and about living in an active ecosystem. So I was asked to talk about lifestyles and communities. What we do, what we have done for really a dozen years, is train people how to bring these concepts into their everyday lifestyles, even when we're in this transition period, we're here in the city, and how to work with the community that we have around us. Whoops. So we were founded in 2005. And in the pictures, you'll see all kinds of things, except for the diagrams. All of these pictures are from our group over the process of the year, years. One of the things that we did is we built the community garden at Holy Nativity. The community garden at Holy Nativity is located on the grounds of a church. It surrounds the entire church. It's a multiple function garden. It grows food for the local food pantry. We run it with a team of volunteers. It builds a little community circle. It's a platform for all of our activities. We call it our clubhouse. And we use that to teach people about organic farming and how to grow high intensity in a small city urban space with high productivity. Along the way, we were asked to create the Emerson Avenue Community Garden. It's a 1-acre garden on an LAUSD middle school. So the environmental change makers came in, helped to build the structure of stakeholders and get them involved, get everybody to be on the same page. That was a project. And we built this 1-acre garden. And the 1-acre garden is, again, multiple functions. You've got community plot style garden where families have plots. You've got school garden where school kids are working in the garden, and you've got community pocket park. LA, City of Los Angeles had designated it as a pocket park. So that's part of what's going on there. Along the way, we worked with the transition movement. The transition movement is a movement out of started out of the UK and is sort of slowly wrapping around the world. And it's looking at the crosshairs of climate change and peak oil and saying, what will our civilizations look like as we move forward? So we brought these ideas to Southern California, held a conference a little bigger than this in our Westchester clubhouse. That's our clubhouse in the old days. And we've launched many groups across the greater Southern California area, all the way from Santa Barbara to Laguna Beach to inland to, I'm blanking on the name, but desert communities too. So some of them still exist today. They have morphed into other names. They're not necessarily using the T word anymore, but they're still doing the work. So there's one in San Fernando Valley's merged with the permaculture grew up there. The Whittier one is part of the Time Bank in Whittier now, but they're still going on today. In Culver City, they're still using the transition word. Last summer, this was our fun project, mud. We built the Westchester Community Oven, which is a community-scale adobe and cob oven, wood-fired oven for bread and pizza. And so our oven is open to the general public, and it's available for anybody to come in and bring their dough, and then they get to bake in the oven. It took about 3 months and about 100 volunteers to build that thing. It was absolutely a fantastic project. So I thought what I would focus on today is how we do it. Because there's a lot over on that board that's talking about how do we get there. And what we've been doing for 12 years, a lot of it can be boiled down into how. So as I talk about how, you get to learn a whole lot more about what we do, because the what isn't that important to you. What is personal to us, because it's about localized community. So how is much more significant. So one of the first things that we did back in 2005, when Peter Root and I sat down and we decided we were going to form this group, the environmental change makers, is we said we're going to focus on positive solutions. At that time, The Inconvenient Truth, nobody had heard of it, hadn't won an Oscar, and if you brought up the idea of climate change, you were more likely to get a debate over whether there was climate change rather than what we were going to do about it. But we wanted to be about solutions. We saw that there was a choice. We could talk about the fiery gates of you-know-what that is right upon us, or we could look at what are we going to do. And so we made a commitment way back in the day that we were going to focus on solutions, and that's what we've done for a dozen years, is showcase what we can do. So we could focus on the droughts and the fires and the floods, and we could talk about all the doomsday stuff, or we could say that all this boils down to one set of solutions. We've got to keep that oil in the ground, and we've got to move on to carbon-free, to energy, low-energy lifestyles. And what does that look like? What does that feel like? Experience it. We've never been a stranger to peak oil since the very beginning. But, Richard Heinberg says it is not just peak oil, it's peak everything. That we're addressing peak in many aspects of our civilization, from coal to copper to uranium to phosphorus to copper to fisheries to forests. We've got a lot of issues that we're hitting peak on. So do we dwell on peak, or do we look at what post-peak looks like? Post-peak needfully is going to be, we use the word of Richard Heinberg's book, that's the idea of power down. The idea of reducing our power requirements across the board, like we saw in the opening game with all the pictures, okay? Talking about appropriate lifestyle. Now, what's an appropriate lifestyle? So, focusing on the positive, I mean, we could focus on biocapacity, and we could say biocapacity is saying how much carrying capacity and all this kind of stuff that do we have in the left in the planet. Or we could get even worse, and we could drill down by continent, and we could say that here in North America, these lifestyles that we call normal require, like if everybody on the planet took these on and tried to live the way we call normal, it'd require 5 planets to provide all those resources. So we live at a 5 planets worth of consumption level. We could focus on that, or we could say, all right, we understand the problem now. We are at peak. We are living at 5 planets worth of consumption, and the only realistic solution is we have 1 planet to come to provide for us. And we need to start living like we've got 1 planet. And so what does that look like? The name of that idea is David Holmgren. He's one of the co-founders of the permaculture movement. He talks about creative dissent. Holmgren says that it took enormous human ingenuity and creativity to develop all these power-intense ways, all these consume ways to climb up the mountain. And we can use just as much creativity and ingenuity to design our way out of it. So Holmgren talks about a designed descent. He calls it a creative descent, or sometimes a permaculture descent. We teach the ideas of the permaculture movement. By the way, you don't have to take pictures of my slides. I will put the whole slide presentation on my website tonight, and then you can just download all the slides yourself. You can use it all. So we showcase ideas from the permaculture movement. We talk about the ethics, we talk about the principles and how they reflect in what we're doing. We also look at many other organizations. The transition movement was founded upon the permaculture ideas. Rob Hopkins, founder of the transition movement, was a permaculture teacher. And he said, what if we took these permaculture ideas and we started to apply this sustainable design idea to more than just landscaping, but we started to look at politics and social messages and what we teach our children and how many different ways we can design all of these different aspects of society. That's what the transition movement is. We also talk about the great turning of Joanna Macy, where she's talking about 3 different paths to get to that more sustainable future. She's talking about stopping action, which is like we're seeing in North Dakota right now. We're going to stop this nightmare from happening. Holding action, which is, that's the same one. Shift in consciousness, which is what we're doing in this room today, is changing the view of what that future looks like, what we're headed towards. And creating the new structures, which is most of our work in our group and the transition movement. So the second major thing that we do is we imagine the path ahead. So years ago, in 2004, I wrote a book. It's a novel, and it takes the story of Los Angeles. It starts with 2004, and it rolls it forward to 2040. Not a jump to 2040 to some mythical future, but a journey to see what it looks like as we put these things in place a little at a time. There's a story, okay? It's only a story. There are many stories now. In those days there weren't. But we imagine the path. We give people a picture of what it might look like. We put these things in place in our gardens so that they're around people. People can experience them. They can touch them. They can feel them. It's a huge thing for us to get people outdoors, to get them touching the earth. It's a huge thing because it changes what's going on in here. Make it feel familiar and easy. This was the day that we took people out on the streets of Los Angeles for urban cycling, including our children. And we were led by the LA Bicycle Coalition, who taught us safety tips for riding on city streets and sharing. You can bet that everybody who participated in that event, the next time they got behind their wheel, they drove differently when they saw a two-wheel vehicle. You can bet that we came home with a lot of skills about how to stay safe and to keep our children safe on the roads. Really important. Once we do it, then we feel okay doing it again. So we're bursting through that barrier of, ooh, this is strange and funky and I don't know what to do. We're actually doing it as our events. And as we go through these things, we're never shy to talk about why we do it. Because ultimately, this is about the legacy that we're leaving to future generations. It is about living at a way that we're content with within our sense of ethics and saying, I can stand proud and I can say, I am doing my best. I'm not wishing about something, I'm doing it. So, doing it, that's another thing we do, is we noticed very early on that when we had an event that was what we call a Get Dirty Workshop, that we had a whole lot more attendance. That when we had things that were people sitting around in a circle, the crowd got really small. So we said, hey, then that's the ticket to success. We'll do a lot of Get Dirty Workshops. So when we called, this was on rainwater harvesting, did we call people in to say, let's talk about rainwater harvesting and have nice PowerPoint slides? No, we did that for about 10 minutes, and then we walked outside and we started digging holes. So that no longer does someone say, how big is the hole, how deep is the hole, how far apart are the pits, how does the channel work? They know because they were standing in them, they dug them, they can go home and they can do it again. Composting workshop, tactile. These people will always know how to layer a compost pile for a most effective breakdown because they've done it. They've broken through on something very meaningful in what they're doing. This woman had never held a power tool before. We came in with drills and she got to hold it, she got to try it. We've had jackhammers out there where people, you had a line of women, including little petite 60-year-old women, wanting to use a jackhammer. I mean, it was absolutely fantastic. It was lots and lots of fun. I didn't put one of those pictures in here, but it was really precious. We do really useful stuff. This happens to be my front yard. We're using urbanite. Urbanite is a material, a really excellent building material that is all around us in the city. It's broken concrete being reused for a new purpose. How do you layer it? How do you create a retaining wall? How do you create a terrace so that your water doesn't just run right off and can infiltrate and soak in and water your vegetables? We worked with the material so that we knew how to do it. And the other part is The infrastructure we have all around us right now from the industrialized growth society isn't a really great match for what we're going to need in that ecological future. So one of the things we're always focusing on is how do we build more infrastructure of the right kind, the kind we're going to need. So we do a lot of projects like that. So another ticket to our success is listening to our community. Our communities come up with some really harebrained ideas. Like they said, well, we want to learn about urban chickens. I said, well, how am I going to do that? And they said, well, what we'd really like to do is see inside a chicken coop. I thought, well, I can't bring one into the classroom. How are we going to do this? So I arranged with 5 neighbors who had chicken coops. Can you just be at your coop for the day? And people will come by like an open house, right? 150 people later, oh my gosh, touring 5 coops. Everybody it was phenomenally successful. People loved it. We called it Cluck Track. Listen to your community. When they tell you what speaker they want to hear from, bring that person in. This was Sandor Katz. We were up to our elbows in sauerkraut, learning how to ferment, live fermentation. It was absolutely brilliant. Who would think that white people in West LA would want to make adobe bricks? Oh my gosh, it was sensational. 2 work days, 288 bricks later, and absolutely amazing things happened. It was really, really fun. So they will tell you what they need. My community said, we need to build something from cob. We need to build an oven. What do we need an oven for? What do we need an oven at a church for? The community oven is now open on the 2nd Saturday of every month to anybody in the community who wants to come in, bring their bread dough, bring their pizza. Pizza's at lunch, bread is in the evening, because that's how the oven temperatures run. We teach people to deal with natural time, the way that the heat load happens in a natural oven. So come on down. It's a little bit of a jaunt from here, but you're welcome to come 2nd Saturday of every month. Whoops. So the other point I wanted to make was keep at it. For every single one of us in this room, no matter how old you are, the rest of your life is going to be change-making. It's a lifelong approach. Keep it fun. We have a ton of fun. We always have music and food, and we do crazy, crazy things. This is when we had about 65 people running around with mat knives, including lots and lots of children, making solar cookers. We were building solar cookers. I think we built like something like 60 solar cookers in an evening, and we were racing the sun. As the sun's going down, it's getting darker, and we're like, oh my gosh, we gotta get this thing wrapped up because we gotta clean up. There's no lights in this space. It was chaos. Chaos is a really great thing to have at an event. And we balance. We balance. We have parties sometimes because we just have to. We're all run by volunteer labor, so everybody is giving. And that creates what Charles Eisenstein teaches us is the gift economy. We work very heavily in the gift economy. And Peter Rood, if he were here today, would be telling you about the amazing things that happen when you work in the gift realm. Because you're giving, and at first we go by the American economic model, and we think, well, we can't just give. What happens? A lot of great things come back to you. And we've had some amazing things come back to the garden, come back to the environmental change makers as we go. Peter's also a real big one on what does it look like? Not like in a West LA, what does it look like, glossy way, but really, he's artistic. He's like, we need a lot more art and beauty around us. We need to soften the harsh lines of the city. We need to surround ourselves with this place. And so we have benches in the garden. There was one precious story of a man who told Peter, he says, see that bench there? That's where I sat when I taught my daughter to read. Magical things happen in the garden. This is our garden, and that's my website. So on my website, there's all kinds of amazing things. I've been giving away free handouts for 12 years. So there's an accumulation of all this free stuff on my website. I also write a blog, so I'm writing pieces all the time, you know, pieces about our events and pieces that are much more introspective about changes in life and things like that. I also have a full assortment of books. Not only did I write Legacy, but I also wrote one called Environmental Changemaking, which was commissioned by Peter's Church to say, how do you go about putting something like this in place in your local community? I've also written a lot of materials about gardening, deeply sustainably, low impact, high carbon, low water in Southern California in our year-round growing season. So you'll find a lot of that on my website.
We do have two copies, one of the novel and of the environmental change-making at our office at the Center for Process Studies. So you're welcome
Okay,
to come
and
by and check
I
those
have
out.
a few copies here. If anyone wants to take one home, you're welcome to. We can talk about that later, but I didn't bring like crates of things. So, but it's a story that was written in 2005, and you know, there are some things that are a little quirky, but one of the things that I did is I wrote it to see if the timeline worked. Did we still have enough time to make the changes we needed? And the answer was, when I wrote it, was a resounding yes. We have the time because there is so much going on. And when I wrote it from eyes of 2005, there wasn't nearly a fraction of the things going on that there are today. So today, we have even more going on that's good, that's in the right direction. So we're actually ahead of the legacy timeline at this point. Questions?
Where are your materials?
I have a book stand back there. I have a free handout back there that is 6 things you can do about lifestyle changes, about low carbon lifestyles, but there's tons more on my website. So I didn't really bring a ton of stuff, but.
Can you just handle your
And I also have a sign up back there if you'd like to be on my mailing list. There's a clipboard for that back there too.
Do you mind just handling your own questions so you're comfortable?
Oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah, just put your hand up if you have a question. Yes?
I'm just a little curious about the logistics of the oven itself in terms of like permitting and things like that. How did that go?
Oh, that's really fun. Well, okay, so we worked with a guy who is from a nonprofit called Adobe Is Not Software. I liked it too. And Ben taught us that Adobe is a traditional building material for Southern California, and it sort of walks the line in the permitting segment so that the building inspectors are kind of looking the other way, and they are not insisting on a permit if nobody's going to jump up and down and say, that thing needs a permit. So we do not have a permit on it. However, if we were to put a roof over it in a permanent fashion, we would definitely need a permit. So we don't have a roof on it. So this last weekend when we thought we were going to get rain, what happened with that? It was covered with a tarp. And we have a team of volunteers who go out there and tuck it in for night when it's going to rain. But there are no permits involved in it, and we run it with a community team. Yes?
I just wanted to mention that just a few feet down here is a significant Adobe building that you might like to take a
All
look
right.
at.
Okay, so anybody into Adobe? I mean, Adobe is where you make those square bricks like you saw in the picture. And then Cob is kind of similar material, a little bit different mix. And that's how you make a dome or any sort of amorphous form that you want to. And you can make some really, really gorgeous stuff with Cob.
You talked about new politics. You've been at this 20 years?
I've been at this for a dozen years.
Okay. What political changes have you made in terms of a more progressive, say, city council person, a school board member that's enlightened? What political changes has your community been able to accomplish?
Well, did you ever hear of a little movement called, we're going to make LA a GMO-free zone? That was us. We got this close till they brought in the biotech lawyers, but we got a good way through it with LA City Council. That was one of our biggest political movements. However, if you think back to the Joanne Macy model, it's talking about stopping action, it's talking about creating new structures. And one of the things that we do is we build partnerships with existing people and try to help them understand the direction this needs to go. But we are not a political organization. And one of the things about the Macy structure is that the Joanne Macy structure, the trio of actions that it takes, it teaches us to trust. It teaches us to say, it's okay to do your segment and let another organization do their segment. You don't have to do it all. And Peter and I said, we're not political animals. This is just not our way of doing things. We don't do the city hall campaigns very well. We do politics of a different sort. We do politics, okay, we built this wonderful garden, and we had all of this food, and it's on a street corner in LA. It's front and center in your face in a residential neighborhood with big houses. And we found out about 3 months later, the local homeowners association had a little thing in their code from the 1940s or something like that that said you're not supposed to grow front yard vegetables. Oops, we're growing them at a church now. But you know what? At the same time as we discovered that, we're like, okay, we're not going to say anything if you don't. And so we just carried on. And by the next spring, they had invited us to be front and center, the showcase of the local garden tour. Okay, so that was endorsement enough. And the point is that you don't always have to change the rules in order to change the society. There are people who are very good at changing rules. I'm not one. So I'll do my part, and that other person can do theirs. And that's how we do politics. Question back there.
You undoubtedly know the man whose last name is Finley, who I can't think
Ron Finley.
Ron.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what he did was, of course, start planting in the parkway.
Yes.
And then he was arrested by the city of Los Angeles because you can't grow food in a parkway.
I believe he was fined.
Well,
I don't believe he was arrested. I believe he was fined, and then someone stepped in to pay his fine. And when they found that the fine was $2,000 for planting in this parkway strip in South LA, activists all over the city started going, this is outrageous. He's created, and you have to understand something about Ron Finley. Ron Finley is an artist. He does things that are gorgeous, gorgeous. It's not like he's putting up a couple sticks and a couple dead beans. He's put up some really beautiful stuff that when you go by it, it's just like, you're just like, oh my God, what's happening there? It's so beautiful. And so this is something that we take a look at, and you drive a city council person over there and you say, we need more of this, not less of this. What are you doing finding this? And the activists did that with Ron Finley. And he's a very dynamic character. And the end of the story was, after about 2 years of hard work with city council, the law was changed so that parkway gardening was permitted in the city of Los Angeles. Now, if you know anything about the politics of the greater LA area, we have 80-something cities in the greater LA basin, so 80 municipalities. So as soon as that went in with Ron Finley's actions, other cities started putting it in place. So it's legal in Culver City to garden your parkways, and a number of them around the basin. So it follows very quickly. Some of them put their new laws in place even before LA did. But he managed to get the law changed through his activism. Did you have a question?
Oh, yeah. So recently I discovered the transition towns that have been starting these groups called inner transitions.
Yes.
Starting in the UK and going elsewhere. So I want to hear about if anything in the LA area is doing anything like that. And if you could speak more about that maybe for other people.
Okay, so the idea of the transition movement is saying we understand that there's got to be this enormous shift in our culture. that shift needs to happen not just with our, there's a part that has to happen with our buildings and structure and our outer world. There's a part that has to happen with, our education and our lifestyles and our economic system. There's also a part that has to change with regards to our inner world. We have all grown up through the Industrial Revolution, that long of time, with a certain set of stories that we told each other was right and good and what to aspire to. But people like Joanna Macy and permaculturists and quite a number of groups actually would say that story is too old. That story doesn't fit where our society needs to go now. We need to modify the story that we tell each other. And what kind of story are we talking about? We're talking about stories about what constitutes success. What do we teach our children? We're talking at our breakout table over here. What is a good job for my child to have? When mom says, oh, I'm so proud of my son. He's a farmer. We don't hear that too much in West LA, but we do have urban farmers in West LA. So part of the inner transition is for us to modify the stories that we tell ourselves and we tell each other. And some of those may be spiritual stories. They may be stories of mankind being separate from the ecosystems of the earth, or mankind being an inclusive part, or even a nourishing part of the ecosystems of the earth. We don't hear those stories. So inner transition events are designed around considering the stories that we tell each other, considering the stories, our stories of origin, and where those stories need to go. And we have held inner transition events, many of them throughout the years. We've brought in some spectacular speakers on grieving the civilization that is we're leaving behind, visualizing the civilization that lies ahead. We've brought in speakers on building a group dynamic. What does it take to do that? So all kinds of phenomenal things that we've been doing. There's also a group called the Pachamama Organization, and they have a series of films that they come out and show. You could host a gathering from them, and it helps you. It originated with a group from the people, shall I say, wealthy white people from the Bay Area, working with people, indigenous people from South America, and each of them feeling called to the other to work together and forming a beautiful partnership and starting to see each other's worldview in a go forward healing fashion. Like, how do we bring more of your world? How do we take some of your world without taking the bad stuff? All of those things. And how do we bridge that? And so we've had them bring their film kit in, and usually with the transition group we will host a session like you're doing here, where you're asking each other questions and doing some group work at the same time, and we'll morph it into transition, so that people are starting to look at the society that really is around them in the city. So that's another tool that's out there, but it's not the only one. There's lots and lots and lots, and that's the whole excitement about this point in time that we're at right now is, yeah, we got a lot of problems, but we also got a lot of people working on solutions. And so our job is to connect the dots and find those people who are working on solutions and shore each other up and support each other and encourage each other and applaud each other and showcase their work in whatever medium you feel is your preferential media, whether that's a social media or an email or a paper. Any of those things work. Share the good news. And in the early days of the Environmental Changemakers, we had a section for every meeting where we started off, and as an intro, we would have sort of popcorn. People would stand up and they would say, this is the good news story that I learned about this month. And they'd share a good news story. And these were in dark, dark days. These were days when, you know, the environmental movement was like this stern schoolmaster telling us we were just like doomed and this kind of thing. And we were like, we really need the hope. Let's bring out the good stories. So bring your good story and share it, because we all needed that. But we still need it today. And that can be your role too, is sharing those good news stories. Because we're so tempted to share the latest climate study. Come on, guys. People in the know don't need that thing coming at them from 15 places. They need to hear about the little farmer down the way who just, you know, just finally got the lease and the permit from the city. They need to hear, you know, you see things like that on City Farmer News. You see, you know, list your news sources, change your news sources so they bring you the good news, so that you're not so scared and you can live in hope and you can feel encouraged and you can feel supported and you can feel like you can do something. Because that's what we're here to do. Yes?
I have two things. Paris, France has created a formula for urban gardens where any space where there's dirt or on street they planted, you can get a permit to be the one who beautifies it. So it's like empowering citizens to beautify their own city. But I do have a question. I have plenty of friends and relatives who live in Toledo, Ohio, and their church has a gigantic lawn. A lot of them have gigantic lawns. What are the best resources for helping them discover how to develop these in your gardens?
Well, let's see. We wrote a booklet.
Okay.
We wrote a booklet. It's called Your Community Garden, and actually, I've identified 4 types of community gardens that there are. And so, if anybody's thinking about, well, we should do a garden here, it really behooves you to do some research and to understand, like, what is the best fit for the people population? How do you fit the people and the plants together? Because, like, it's one thing to just put a mess of plants out there, but it's a whole nother thing to enter into a lifelong relationship with that piece of land where you're going to be fixing it and you're going to be maintaining it. That is a different mission. And so our booklet is called Your Community Garden Best Practices, and it really encapsulates a lot of the work we've done. We also have our book Environmental Change Making, which is a little bit older now. I wrote it in 2008, but it really shows the story of what we did the first 3 years in the Environmental Changemakers, where we transformed from, just so we correct any misunderstandings, it is not a church organization. It is a community organization that has their clubhouse on the grounds of a church that is a benevolent landlord to what we do. There are a few of the people from inside this, we joke about like the front door on Sunday people and the side garden on Thursday people. I'm one of the side garden on Thursday people. Peter leaves the front door on Sunday people. And, you know, so there is some interaction, but there's a ton of pride about what is happening there together. But on that campus, there are all kinds of things going. There's a yoga center, there's Zen meditation, there is macrobiotic cooking classes, there are gourmet cooking classes, there are bread making classes at Los Angeles Bread Makers Meetup. There's a raw foods co-op, there is a radical homeschooler meeting, there are constant AA meetings, there is, boy, I'm losing my, multiple Girl Scout troops. So it is an active site. So Peter would stand up here and tell you, oh yeah, he says, well, I saw what was going on and I realized that we were stewards for this piece of land, and that what we needed to do was to open it to its new purpose. And he was written, an article was written about him in the Christian century about entry points, where he was looking at how many places could he welcome people in, not just through those doors on Sunday, but welcoming people in. So I would say that the first place for your church community to start is to start here. It's not starting with the dirt, it's to start with their view of their role call Peter Root. He'd be happy to talk to you, even if you're out of state, and to help you see what changes came about in order to make that possible.
Do you help people in other neighborhoods to start sleeper cells of gin thinkers?
Sleeper cells. I like that. Yeah. You know, sometimes I get up here and I introduce myself as the chief troublemaker. But, you know, there are a lot of models, and I don't have good resources I have written, but if you pick up a copy of the Transition Handbook by Rob Hopkins, it's got exercises in there. You can actually do the thing right from that. And environmental change making also tells how we started, you know, it's like, okay, put out a couple flyers at the library, get some people in, start with 5 people in a room, don't be shy about it, you know, build it, build it, build it. And really, you know, and the things that I put in the presentation here of like, we're going to have a positive focus. We're not going to be a doomsday organization. We're not going to be sitting here grinding on about what's going to happen about peak oil. We're going to say, well, peak oil gives us a set of solutions. We've got to power down. What does that look like? Oh, what can we change about, hey, the facility we're working in? Hey, well, how can we showcase local food at our event? One of the early things we did was we declared the site where we meet a styro-free zone. Now, that doesn't sound like all that big a deal, but do you realize how much of that junk is around us and how toxic it is? You pour hot liquid into that cup, it's like carcinogens, oh my God. And the people who work there, and the production of it, and the disposal of it. So it was like a little step. We started with very little steps. Back in the day, there was no bag ban. We would cheer each other when we remembered to bring our bags to the market. We would cheer each other when we set up our compost pile. So the sleeper cell secret is start really small and don't get into that good old American pride of like, it's gotta be big to be good. No, the grassroots movement, there's a quote, it's like, the revolution is underway. It's just something you're never gonna see on the front page of the LA Times because who runs the LA Times? The industrialized growth system. Okay, so they're not going to report on news that is not showing the building of their system. And we're not showing the building of that system. We know that system is like old news. We're building what's new. And so you have to go other places to get your news. So, you know, news from each other, getting your news from multiple sources and saying, celebrate the good news. I think there was a question back here.
We're a member of this church and started our community garden out here.
I haven't seen it. I'll go out there.
Well, go look for it. After about 3 years, we failed. The rabbits and the squirrels ate most of the fruit, vegetables. So it's no more. Then we decided to save water. That was our goal. So we converted the front to an urban forest. We talked about using it as a garden, but we decided our goal was really to conserve water, even though we didn't pay any bill. So I'm kind of transitioning to where you are, but when our goal is to save water, and that seems so crucial here, how do we balance those two things?
Well, okay, so just an example from our site. We realized really early on that, okay, what does having a harvest mean? Does it have to mean buckets full of vegetables? So permaculture teaches you to observe and interact. You observe what is, and you base your design from what is, okay? And we looked at what is, and one of the things that was happening at that site was every single week, Peter would drive to the flower mart in downtown LA, pick up some water-dense flowers that had been flown in from South America, enormous chemical load in South America and some poor farm workers community, flown in here with enormous amounts of greenhouse gas emissions and fossil fuel burning, and brought them here so that they could look gorgeous on his altar. oh my gosh. Even if we just grew flowers for the church, we'd be making a significant step. And when you look at it like that and you start to educate people that harvest can mean flowers, harvest can mean vegetables for the food pantry, harvest can mean growing compost crops to recycle back into the soil to grow living soil. There are many, many things it can mean. You know, maybe your goal may be to partner with the California Native Plant Society and say, hey, we got property, come on in and do a showcase garden and put all your signs in. We'll help fundraise for your signs and we'll help educate the community in how to create a pollinator-friendly garden. Maybe that's your role. You know, examine what is your goal. Does your goal have to be the identical one that that church in Westchester used? It doesn't. It needs to be the one that works for the people who are here, the people who are the stewards of this particular land. And to do that, you need to figure out who are they, who are the stakeholders, and what are they interested in? How are they interested in participating? What is going to happen? You know, what is the best route forward? And the best route forward is not mimicking someone else's model. It is coming with an organic growth from the people that you have who are part of the project, listening to each other and saying, what could our goals possibly be? And that grows closeness, that grows all kinds of possibilities, because we know that there's many things that we could be doing. There's no way that any one of us could do all of them. There's no way any one group could do all of them. So pick your sticker and do that sticker with pride and security and trust that someone else is doing the other 59 stickers on the board. Thank you.